All right, for every chapter, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of an overview using the PowerPoint that comes with our textbook, which gives you a good outline of the chapter. I'm going to upload these into the modules so you'll have access to them. But it's important to make sure that you are using these along with what I talk about and that you're reading your chapter. And these will be a helpful as you go through. It'll be a good guide as you go through the reading of the chapter. So if you will take a look at the chapter outline, how the chapter is broken down, you guys can look at that for yourself. Learning objectives, some of the major points the chapter wants you to know, and you'll be writing about some of those in your discussion boards that you're doing. Okay. Really, this chapter is trying to get us off to a start. Okay, it's a transition chapter in a lot of ways, breaking apart what's been going on in the first part of the course and what will happen in the second part of this course, which is what we talk about. And so you'll read about the really the beginnings of exploration. You'll be reading about the English, the French, the Dutch as they make their way over here. The French, for example, gaining control and exploring Louisiana. The Elizabeth I from England beginning to really begin this age of English exploration. So you'll be reading about, while that's going on, of course, another major thing that's going on in Europe are these religious wars left over from the Reformation. The Reformation was the beginnings, really, of Protestantism in Europe that was spread throughout Europe and, of course, spread eventually worldwide. So these religious wars really kind of take control of parts of Europe. The 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 is really a major war that involves what is today Germany, the Holy Roman Empire. And it's simply Catholics versus Protestants. And virtually every major European power is drawn into this conflict. Very hard to be exploring. It's very hard to be building up your strength as a country if you're involved in these religious wars. The Spanish are involved, the French are involved, virtually every major power in Europe is involved in these religious wars. So you have to kind of deal with the global situation first, and that's what this first part of the chapter is about. Whether it's about what's going on with the Spanish, the major wealth the Spanish have from their New World Empire, which unfortunately causes a major inflation that really is very difficult on Europe's economy. You have a lot of uncertainty. That's why you have witchcraft crazes and things like that, where people are looking for some explanation as to why all of these crazy things are going on. It's a very unsettling time. It's this transition between the Middle Ages and what's going to become the modern era. And there are lots of weird things that are going on. Okay. One of the things that you'll learn about are some of these major powers, whether it is Spain, whether it is England, whether it is the Netherlands, and how they fit into the kind of this global scene. The Spanish have a New World Empire, but they are eventually going to begin to fall by the wayside. Okay. The Dutch are a major power and a major trading power. The English will defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588 when the Spanish decide that they are going to try to invade England and destroy Elizabeth's power. It goes miserably. So there are lots of things that are going on economically in Europe. As you read through this stuff, as you read through the economic part of this, you'll find out that this is what the chapter is trying to set up for you, because we're building to something. Okay. So whether it's the Netherlands, whether it's the Dutch doing all of this trade, whether it's England getting involved, you have all of these things that are going on that we are starting to pay attention to. And then you get to this, okay, Henry IV, one of the first Bourbon kings of France. And if you read about him when you get to this part of the chapter, Henry IV is the beginning of the Bourbon dynasty in France. He is revolutionary in a lot of ways because he will practice religious toleration. He was a Protestant before he became king, but he will convert to Catholicism after he becomes king in 1589. In many ways, Henry IV is the beginnings of a political transformation in France and, well, in some ways in Europe too, that is beginning to move towards this idea of absolutism. Now, this is a concept that you're going to continue to work on even as we get into our next chapter. All right, absolutism, absolute monarchy means total, complete control. Medieval kings really only controlled areas that really were their lands, all right, and other nobles controlled other parts of France or England or whatever. But when you start seeing absolutism, you're talking about a king controlling a nation, a king controlling all of a particular nation, having so much power that we deem him to be absolute. Now, Henry IV is not an absolute monarch, right? But he, in a lot of ways, sows the seeds of absolute monarchy. He was very popular. He will revolutionize the French economy. He will kind of take France down the road towards mercantilism. He uses his popularity. He uses very good appointments. The Duke of Sully, for example, if you read about him, was this financial genius that he employs, and Sully is able to turn France into a country that's operating on a surplus. And we don't really know what Henry would have been able to accomplish, but in 1610 he's assassinated, and by a really quite insane former Catholic priest. So Henry is killed on the cusp, really, maybe of doing something totally revolutionary. But trust me, as we kind of go into the next chapter, you're going to see the end fruit of this. What he sows here, we'll get to see flourish under Louis XIV in really about 50 years from now, when we proclaim Louis XIV to be the best example of an absolute monarch. Okay, so you can see some of these things that really come to fruition, right? But we got to get through some bad things first, like Louis XIII, who really is kind of a pretty strange sort of thing. You'll read about that. 30 Years' War is going on. France has to deal with that. But in 1648, here's another sort of pivotal date. This is the Peace of Westphalia that ends the 30 Years' War. Is one of those things that it's kind of one of these remarkable dates. It's the last of the religious wars. The Peace of Westphalia sort of signifies an end of warfare being about religion in Europe. Now, we'll still see some remnants of it. You could argue, for example, that the English Civil War that's going on around about this time is also considered to be a religious war. You could even make the argument later on when we talk about the Glorious Revolution in England that it might be a religious or have a religious aspect. Okay, but it's the last of the major religious wars, and warfare from here on out becomes a playground of the state. It's a way to make the state a more powerful entity by making it well, in some ways, making it. Why do we go to war? We go to war to make ourselves stronger. We go to war to make ourselves richer. And when you start seeing that happen, that's a clear sign that we're moving towards the modern age. Okay. So you'll read about Elizabeth as well. All right. You'll be actually watching a video about Elizabeth as part of one of your discussion boards. Make sure that you understand how important Elizabeth is to England as you go through this section. Elizabeth is always considered to be one of the most important religious monarchs, or excuse me, the most important English monarch, sorry, in all of history. She's way up there on everybody's list. So make sure that you understand how important she is. She defeats the Spanish at the Spanish Armada. She will begin English exploration. Okay, all of that stuff is really important. After her death, though, she doesn't have any legitimate heirs, and so this really kind of causes a little bit of a problem and you get into these early Stuart monarchs like James I and Charles I, then you'll read about the beginnings really of the English Civil War, okay, and what's going on there. What we are doing in England, though, is we're setting the stage for what happens next, the beginnings of constitutional monarchy, which is very different from absolute monarchy. Okay, so you really have two competing systems going on here, and that's a real important thing to kind of understand. There's a big difference between what's going on in France and what's going on in England. Okay, so this chapter will take you through the English Civil War, the beginnings of Oliver Cromwell, when Parliament and Cromwell rule over England during this time period, and then you'll talk about the return of the king. Okay. So as you kind of go through this, all right, and you get to the end of this, all right, you're setting the stage really for what we're going to talk about in the next chapter. All right, the beginnings of absolute monarchy, constitutionalism becoming really set in England, okay, and all that stuff is really important. And we will hammer that stuff during really our next lecture. Okay. Now remember, I'm going to post these up here so that you can go. I'm going to kind of go through them just so you can see or what's going on. But I'm going to post these, this video and these cards up in our module for this chapter. Okay, so make sure you take a look at that. All right, see you guys next time.